Good afternoon. I'm really excited to be here today, be part of the Chicago Digital Summit, and I want to thank you all for joining me. Before I get started, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Ryan Kosanek, and during the week, I am the CEO and co-founder of Covalent Marketing. We're a consulting organization where we help marketers transform the way that they engage with their customers. On the weekends, I like to portray myself as a 90s rapper or potentially a boy band artist like Joey Fatone from NSYNC. The backstory to this is that, as you all know, it's Halloween, right? And so last weekend, my wife and I were invited to a Yo MTV Raps themed Halloween party, and this was my outfit. To set the stage, I would like to talk about a story about Ryan. He's 41 years old, living in Chicago with his family, and he hasn't really in the past paid that much attention to his credit. But until recently, we all are, very attuned to the Equifax event that's happened. And so he decided that he needed to go out and secure his credit and also protect his family. So where he started he began with a Google search. And he came across an ad with credit.com. And so he decided to sign up, and after signing up, he received a welcome email, and that email just gave him some information about the services that they provide. And after logging in, into credit.com to see his credit score, he was excited to see that he had excellent credit. And while on there, he was also browsing the site to see what else they had, and he looked at some credit cards that had some interest to him, but he decided not to do anything. So a few days go by, and he receives another email informing him of the credit.com mobile app. So he decides to log in. After logging in, he is presented with those credit card offers. And at this time, he decided to sign up and fill out an application for that credit card because he had an upcoming trip with his family. So with credit.com, every 30 days, the credit score refreshes for you. And so 30 days had gone by, and he went back in and he got an email, and he went back in to look at his credit score, and oh my gosh, it dropped. So he's freaking out, and he's wondering, what he's going to do. He just applied for that credit card, and credit.com had then credit counseling services. So he called up the sales rep and talked about what his options are to get his credit back to where it was before. And so the salesperson talked about 3 different packages, and he ended up going with the middle package that gave him 24-hour credit monitoring, as well as advisory services and support to help repair his credit. So about 4 months have gone by, and his credit's back to where it needs to be, and he decides that he doesn't really see the value anymore in the service that this credit repair service that he had purchased. So he called up customer service to cancel. And in that, as he was talking to the customer service rep, she was advising that he really should just maintain the credit monitoring and move down to the lower package. And then she also talked about how that my wife should get on credit monitoring as well, and offered me a 50% discount for that. And so Ryan and his wife live happily ever after, and they're feeling comfortable and confident about their credit. So what does this mean from a marketer's perspective? Supporting Ryan's journey and creating an endless end-to-end experience for Ryan as a marketer is challenging. And so what we're going to do today is talk about these key marketing capabilities and the challenges that we as marketers are faced with to drive cross-channel or to improve cross-channel customer engagement. The first challenge that I'm going to talk about is that silos still exist. You may see yourself in one of these silos where you have organized your marketing around a certain line or lines of business. And an example of that is recently I was working with a healthcare company, and they had pharmacy as a line of business, they had clinical, they had a wellness group, they had in-home care services, and their marketing was aligned vertically around these silos. You also may find yourself where your marketing organization is aligned by channels. You may have an email marketing team, a direct marketing team, you may have a digital team, and that in itself presents silos. And then from a product perspective, retail is a great example where merchandising predominantly runs the show and marketing is aligned to certain product categories. So to address that, what we can look at is, from a marketing organization perspective, is to start to simplify some of our marketing functions. And starting from the left around innovation, this might be newer, a newer idea or a newer concept. And what I mean by innovation as a function is that it helps drive transformation across the marketing organization. You can think of it much like a consultative, an internal consulting organization, where they may be helping enable new channels, or they may be helping you build new capabilities, evaluating new technologies. Next is optimization. I see it all too often where campaign performance reporting from a campaign perspective sits in one area and analytics sits in another area. And really what we need to do is bring and consolidate all of the reporting and analytics into a single function. And then strategy. Strategy is probably more common around looking at the creative, the general messaging, the content, but also looking at it from a customer journey perspective. And then lastly, operations. This is really the glue that brings all of our marketing to life. And I would say they're probably one of the most important functions within the marketing organization in our ability to deliver from a cross-channel perspective. Those folks are dealing with the data, working with IT. They're also administering, from a business perspective, all the different technology platforms that marketing is using today. Another area that I think oftentimes gets overlooked that causes a lot of confusion within the marketing organization and also maybe potentially working with those silos is terminology. You can probably reflect on the number of times that you've had meetings and discussions where you can't agree or there are multiple meanings for the same term. And those discussions, really become more around what does that mean versus the actual work that you're trying to do. And so by creating a common, taxonomy, it really starts to allow the organization and working with your silos be able to all speak the same language. And third, while this isn't all that sexy, being able to establish a common standard marketing hierarchy by which all of those different silos within the marketing organization feed into allows your organization to start to not only look horizontally in supporting those different silos, but be able to then define them in a common way that allows that horizontal transparency across all the different marketing that you're doing. And so to bring that all together, we talked about the silos in the very beginning. And we talked about how we can simplify some marketing functions, establish a a common taxonomy and a standard marketing hierarchy, it doesn't mean that these silos end up going away. But looking at those three components, it allows you to start to work across those silos and work in concert with each other. And while the silos, bring a lot of knowledge about their particular line of business, as an example, but then you have a common structure by which you organize your marketing. The next challenge is that campaigns are dead. And what I mean by that is by talking about this Starbucks example. So I myself, I drink black coffee. I'm a big cold brew fan today. My wife, on the other hand, she loves these, what I call high maintenance coffee drinks from Starbucks. It might be, as you can see on this label of this coffee drink, she may have, a venti skim misto with a shot of hazelnut, extra caramel, and the list goes on and on. Well, what we've done with applying that analogy to campaigns, we've done a very similar thing. We've mixed a bunch of things into a campaign and we've lost the granularity. You can look at it from a perspective where you've said, I want to do this campaign to send out this offer. Well, in reality, they're almost one and the same. They're synonymous to one another. And so what we need to start to do is break down the components of the campaign and start to realign them across the customer journey. To illustrate that, I'm going to go back to the story about Ryan with the credit.com. And so if you remember at the very beginning, there was the Equifax event that triggered his need to go and look to secure his credit or monitor his credit. And then he received a series of messages over a number of different communications, whether it was from email and from a mobile perspective. And then when he signed in to the mobile app, based on that interaction and his historical search around those credit card offers, he then was presented that through the mobile app. And so when he signed up and applied for that credit card, he had moved all the way through, in this case, in essence, purchasing, and waiting for that credit card, but then another event occurred, right? His credit score dropped. So now he moved from, while waiting for that credit card to come back into research, right? He was researching how he could repair his credit. And then he received some content and an offer around free consultation services. And lastly, when he called in to cancel his service, it was, our ability as marketers to proactively understand that behavior and able to retain him by finding a product or service that was better suited and was delivering value to him than the one he had before. So when we think about campaigns, I think about it as a way that we need to reposition how we approach them. And it's really pivoting towards messaging and content. You have many sources of where messaging and content can come from. It can come from externally, from third parties, affiliates. It comes from internal within your own marketing organization. It could be coming from those silos that I was talking about from a line of business perspective. And what we need to do is we need to collect all that messaging and content and start to store it centrally in a library. And from there, we then are able to leverage that library of messaging and content and start to do some optimization around how we're going to, from a customer perspective, what messages, what offers, what content that we are going to deliver. And you can think about this as there's a lot of terms around like next best action, next best offer. From a content perspective, you may be personalizing the website based on the fact that, I have a family, in various images. But when the two come together and we end up delivering that, it's when we create those personalized interactions. The third challenge is around content. It's everywhere. It's a mess. We have content sitting in our mobile apps. We have content sitting with our email service providers. We have content sitting in our web content management systems. And what's caused this mess is we as marketers have continued to add channels. We also added new systems and new technology. And we bring on, we start out with email, we bring on an email service provider, we load content, into the email service provider to develop the emails that we send out. Same thing we did with our website. And so you have all this content sitting out in the channels, and what we need to start doing is pulling that content out of the channels and bringing it down into a central content management system or digital asset management tool. And you might have heard this term around headless content management systems. I look at it as a way of being more channel agnostic. And so by bringing this content down into a central repository, you then can allow those channels to dynamically source content from the content management system across all those channels. So it can help drastically improve the way that you can deliver cross-channel customer engagement. The next challenge is around process and workflow. It's still inefficient and ineffective. Anyone familiar with Missoula, Montana? Couple of, okay, great. So Missoula, I learned a little interesting fact that Missoula, Montana, back in the 1890s, had two competing grid systems being developed simultaneously. And if you look at the middle here, you see where these roads or streets were built on a 45-degree angle. And this area is in and around the University of Montana, and it's a neighborhood called Rose Hill. And these streets, they kind of dubbed slant streets. And so when you think about process, right, if I have these 45-degree angle streets where I'm used to a traditional grid, what am I going to do? Probably going to go around it, right? Or if I start or want to try to go through it, it's going to be very inefficient and time-consuming and costly. So what we need to start doing is thinking about how we can create purpose and focus for our marketing operations. Earlier I talked about common taxonomy and a standard marketing hierarchy. But building upon that, we want to look at the process as a whole of how work gets done. And we need to start to break down the process, not necessarily focused on building around those silos, or building around a particular channel, or building around a product group, but really getting down into focusing on what is the work at hand from a project perspective that we need to do to deliver that messaging and content to all those channels. We can do that by developing a phase-driven approach by the use of milestones. Additionally, we oftentimes are building process around people, actual people. And instead, we need to start looking at it from a roles perspective. What are the roles that you play within that process? You may have, as an example, you may have from a marketing operations perspective, you may have a campaign developer or a digital marketer. From a copy and creative perspective, you may have, your artists, and I'm talking about, the roles, right, and not the actual people. And when you start to focus on roles, your process becomes agnostic of the people. And so people will come and go in and out of your process. But when you have it attached to a role, the role remains the same. And it's just that you swap people in and out. As an example, and I know this is an eye chart, this is a process map at a very detailed level for a single milestone. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with a SIPOC. And what that stands for, as you see across the top here, it stands for suppliers, inputs, the process, outputs, and consumers. So when you start to build these process maps, you start to identify, in this case, how long does something, or how long should something take? What are the forms and the inputs that define the work that needs to be done? And in this case, this was an example of an intake process where a marketing manager was supplying information to a developer to start building the campaign. And so the forms were used to fill out to define the criteria, the targeting rules, so on and so forth along those lines. And one of the unique things that this also tells us is the enablers. And what I mean by enablers is oftentimes when we are developing marketing process, we let the technology dictate the process. And it really should be the other way around. We should be defining this process as much as I talked about roles being agnostic of people. We should be developing our process as well, agnostic of technology. But this process map allows us to then identify where the technology is automating certain steps within our process. So more enabling us, not controlling us. And so as we move along here, we end up going through the process steps. And we oftentimes need to pass now information on downstream. And so that's what is the outputs of this process. And so as an example here, we had a simple campaign strategy going in, but it produced a lot of outputs on the way out as we got through this milestone of the process. So lastly is then who's involved? And I talked about the roles earlier, but it's all the people that are involved in this process, not only from the beginning, but also as to those that are going to be involved in the next step or milestone within the process. The last challenge is around analytics, and it's still disconnected from marketing execution. And it's much like this picture here where it's really hard to drive a car without an engine. And in today's modern marketing world, it's really hard to deliver cross-channel customer engagement without leveraging analytics. So there's a couple, 3 ways to start to connect analytics to execution. Probably most common and most traditional is around data integration. Data integration is in the example of you may have a statistician, an analyst that's doing some predictive modeling. And they run a model, score a set of customers, and then through a data integration process, we'll push that data and information into or made available to through typically a database of sorts, to allow your marketing execution tools to leverage that and to segment and eventually execute, on that campaign. The next one is around APIs. Technology today, from a marketing perspective, or more broadly from a customer engagement perspective, as we know, is becoming a lot more open. They're exposing access to their applications through APIs. And so you're starting to see analytics as a service in the cloud and other ways where we can connect our marketing technologies to be able to access analytical systems to do some scoring. And from an outbound perspective, or more from a batch perspective, you can look at it as inline scoring, where I'm working in a marketing, campaign management tool, and I have my general business rules, and where I've identified a population or an audience of customers that I want to go after. And then what I can do is through APIs, call out to a model, score that customers, get the results back within the application, and then further segment and finish my campaign. And then the last one, we're seeing a lot of technologies nowadays where they're starting to get, they have built-in analytics themselves. A good example of that is real-time marketing capabilities. And what I mean by that is that when we talk about real-time marketing, it's really about more from an inbound perspective. Like, for example, back to the story that I told about Ryan, when he opened his mobile app, we knew at that time, based on his browsing behavior on the website, that historical interactions and data that we had about him, you're able to leverage that in real time. And they usually typically will leverage a machine learning or Bayesian-like algorithm. And not only can it hold like a predictive model score, but it also takes in contextual data within that point in time when I'm interacting with, in this case, credit.com. A newer trend that we are seeing a lot, and it's, I guess, more than a trend, it's real, is around start exploring cognitive. And the way that I look at cognitive from a marketing perspective is this picture is a good analogy. This is actually Ford and their assembly line back, 100 or so years ago. And from a cognitive perspective, humans and machine have been working together for a very long time. And cognitive is really no different. And what we're seeing is that cognitive is really kind of playing in these four areas. The first is chatbots. Chatbots are really kind of grew up more from a service perspective, but it's a great opportunity for marketers. It's a new channel. It's much like mobile many years ago. And chatbots are a great opportunity. And cognitive is really helping drive a lot of that human-like interaction. But it's also an opportunity where we can display messaging and really kind of drive that cross-channel engagement. It's also being used in analytics. And what cognitive is doing from an analytics perspective is helping us answer questions that we aren't asking. So really it's providing us with recommendations and insights to things that we may not know or have asked. We're also seeing cognitive starting to come into a lot of the tools and technologies that we are using today as helping us within the application itself. And then lastly, it's being used in content management or digital asset management tools. And where it's playing a role there is really helping us with the manual and mundane tasks of tagging content. And so cognitive capabilities, as you ingest assets and media into the system, Cognitive can read those and start to tag them for you. And you still have the ability to add specific tags and other things to it yourself that's specific to your business, but it really accelerates a lot of that. So what we learned today, we learned how to work across our silos through simplifying our marketing functions, creating a common taxonomy, and a standard marketing hierarchy. We also looked at how we can break down the components of the campaign and align more to a customer journey. From a content management perspective is getting it out of the channels and bringing it centrally into a digital asset management tool. And then from a process perspective, really driving the process and having it help you rather than hinder you. And lastly, around connecting analytics to marketing execution. Thank you.